Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. Not the original one, I already reviewed that. This is the reboot that came out this year. So from this point on, I'm just going to refer to this one as Modern Warfare 23 just to keep things short and simple. While this was released for PC, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5, what you'll be seeing throughout this video is the PC version. This is a first-person shooter and the sequel to last year's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 reboot, which I will henceforth be referring to as Modern Warfare 22 for simplicity's sake. But anyway, this was developed primarily by Sledgehammer Games and of course published by Activision, and was released in full on November 10th of this year, which means that Activision gave me a birthday present, which might as well have been a massive middle finger because it was basically a $70 DLC for Modern Warfare 22. And the sad part is I'm not even exaggerating that, because when you install Modern Warfare 23, it installs over Modern Warfare 22. And if you don't have Modern Warfare 22 already installed, it will install it for you. But you can't play any of the Modern Warfare 22 content unless you own a license, I suppose, for Modern Warfare 22. Meaning that if all you were buying was Modern Warfare 23, then what you would have access to is the Modern Warfare 3 campaign, the Zombies mode, the Modern Warfare 3 iteration of the multiplayer, and Warzone, which is just carried over from Modern Warfare 22, but with some Modern Warfare 23 content slapped into it. And the sad part is, if this actually were an expansion pack for Modern Warfare 22, first off, it would be the first proper expansion pack since the original Call of Duty's expansion pack, United Offensive, which at the very least would be interesting. And more importantly, the game would be far less divisive than it actually is. This is a very polarizing game, for very good reason. Activision, in their infinite greed, decided that the best course of action would be to take what originally was going to be just an expansion that contained some extra content for Modern Warfare 22's multiplayer, as well as a shorter single-player campaign to go along with it that would expand the story from what Modern Warfare 22 was doing, and turn it into a sort of standalone game that costs $70 for the Standard Edition and $100 for the Vault Edition. And upon making this decision, they also went, oh, by the way, Sledgehammer, this needs to be out next year, so get to it. This, of course, resulted in the development being highly rushed, which really shows in a lot of ways, which I will detail more as I continue throughout the review. But before I go any further in this review, I do need to bring up a few things. The first is that while I will not be sugarcoating anything, while I will not be holding anything back throughout this review, I also am not going to exaggerate anything. A lot of people have been saying that this is the absolute worst game in the Call of Duty series, but they say the same exact kind of thing about every single game that releases in it. This is nowhere near the worst game in the series. That would be World at War Final Fronts. If you're curious about that one, I have a review of it. You might find that interesting. The other thing I need to mention before we really get further in here is that I didn't really mess around much with the Zombies mode. I did try it out for the purpose of this review, but the simple fact of the matter is that the Zombies modes in all of the Call of Duty games, and just zombies in general, bore the living crap out of me, so I just don't mess around with them very much. And the final thing I need to mention before I go any further is, on a similar note to the Zombies modes, I'm also not going to talk too much about Warzone because I don't play Warzone. I don't have any interest in Battle Royale whatsoever, so I just don't play that mode at all. And the DMZ mode I got pretty tired of back in Modern Warfare 22, so I don't really play it anymore either. Now this review is going to be focused on the content that is specifically new to Modern Warfare 23, and so let's just go ahead and start delving right in and see what we're dealing with. And like always, we'll go ahead and start with the presentation, where there's not much to talk about because it's basically Modern Warfare 22 all over again, but with a few tweaks here and there and some new stuff to mess around with. I use the term new quite loosely there though, because a fair amount of the content that is supposedly new for Modern Warfare 23 is actually just recycled content from Modern Warfare 2019 or Modern Warfare 22, but with a few tweaks here and there. Now, to some degree, I do understand that. They were pressed for time, so they recycled the content that they could and put in new content where they could as well. But unfortunately, a fair amount of the content that they did add to the game is not really done properly. For example, a lot of the weapon handling animations have a lot of clipping problems where the hands just clip through the weapon model. Most likely because they're repurposing animations from previous Call of Duty games for the new equipment in this, but didn't actually tweak the animations properly for the new models, so you end up with some clipping issues. There's also a fair amount of noticeable pop-in, which is fairly impressive considering I'm running this thing on a very fast SSD, and while it's not necessarily all that concerning, I have run into a fair few graphics glitches and occasional slowdowns and things like that, but so far I haven't run into any major technical problems, just some mild inconvenience stuff that normally sorts itself out fairly quickly either within the game or just with a simple restart. And while the performance certainly isn't as finely tuned as it was in Modern Warfare 22, it still generally runs rather well, and they did put a pretty big emphasis on making sure that it is highly performant on a wide variety of hardware. That said, when you move on from visuals, performance, and technical aspects and move into the sound design, that's where things get a bit messier because they did introduce some new weapons and such, and those have to have new gun and explosion sounds. And those are definitely a very mixed bag. They're not bad necessarily, but they just don't have quite the same kind of oomph that the gun and explosion sounds in Modern Warfare 2019 and Modern Warfare 22 did. Obviously the stuff that was carried forward is fine, but the new stuff just isn't quite as good. It's not wildly off to the point where it's distracting or anything, but if you're really paying attention, you do notice it, and it is just a bit disappointing. Of more concern, however, are the voice acting, which definitely seems more phoned in this one than it was in the previous games. In the previous games, they actually seemed to put a fair amount of effort into their performances, and they did what they could with the material they had, even where the material wasn't necessarily all that great. But in Modern Warfare 23, the material is just so bad that there's not a whole lot they could actually do with it, and you get a lot more of the, well, let's just collect the paycheck anyway vibe. To make matters worse, while the previous two games had a lot of the cinematic action thing going on with regards to music, Modern Warfare 23 barely has any music in it at all. You get it to some degree during multiplayer and it's in the menus, but in the actual campaign itself, there's almost no music throughout the vast majority of it, so you just there listening to the ambient sounds and the sounds of combat, and you just can't help but feel like something's missing. Because something is missing in the form of the soundtrack, which turns out was actually a fairly significant part of both of the previous games' campaigns. Don't get me wrong, the game not having much of a soundtrack doesn't necessarily make it unplayable or anything, but it is such a conspicuously absent element of the presentation that you can't help but notice it and, much like with the voice acting, be rather disappointed with it. So when you bring all of the presentation together, you end up with something that is definitely very disappointing, despite it still having very high AAA production values for the most part. I mean, hell, they haven't even really improved the interface much since Modern Warfare 22. Obviously, I got kinda used to using that interface, but it was still awful, and it remains awful. So, yeah, presentation-wise, Modern Warfare 23 is just a bit of a mess. But of course, as mixed of a bag as the presentation can be, what really matter here are the story and the gameplay. And the story in this takes place after the events of Modern Warfare 22, where the end of that game teased what was going to happen in this, with the reference to the infamous No Russian level from the original Modern Warfare 2. Rather than start the game immediately with the conclusion to that teaser, however, they start the game with a reference back to the Gulag level from the original Modern Warfare 2. Except in a twist that shatters your very perceptions of the entire franchise, you're not going in to rescue Price like you did in Modern Warfare 2. Instead, it turns out that you're playing as one of Makarov's cronies and you're trying to rescue Makarov from the Gulag. Oh goody, they're already starting off with a call for nostalgia and an attempt to subvert expectations. Needless to say, it doesn't really go over as well as the developers were hoping. Sure, it's a bit of a callback to nostalgia, because the Gulag level was one of the standout levels in Modern Warfare 2, but the problem you'll quickly notice with Modern Warfare 23 is that it severely lacks personality. The original Modern Warfare 2, of course, had the Hans Zimmer score to go along with it, and it was really going for that Michael Bay action movie vibe, so it was a bit over the top, it was a bit ridiculous, sure, but you really did feel like you were playing something that was meant to be a very cinematic experience. Same kind of thing happened with the original Modern Warfare 3, and while it didn't necessarily work as well in the original Modern Warfare 3, it still worked better than what we get in Modern Warfare 23, where the soundtrack is pretty much non-existent, where those original film inspirations really aren't present anymore, and the game just doesn't really have much going on in atmosphere. So you get the mechanical experience of going through the Gulag again, but it just doesn't have the same kind of charm. And the change in perspective, being a level where you actually play as the bad guys for a change, doesn't really have the impact that the developers were probably hoping for. I mean, at the end of the day, you're still playing through the Gulag level regardless, and it's only at the very end of it that it's revealed, oh, by the way, you were playing as the bad guys this whole time, and it has absolutely no bearing on anything, really. I mean, after all, it's not like you weren't fighting Russians in the previous 2 games either. Anyway, once you get through the Gulag sequence and Makarov escapes from the Gulag, he starts to put his plans into motion. And for the rest of the game, you're going to be playing as the good guys again, Task Force 141, as they try to stop Makarov's machinations and whatever he was hoping to achieve with them. I mean, he talks about restoring the glory of Russia, but I'm not really sure how framing the small Middle Eastern nation of Urzikstan for a series of attacks on Russians is going to result in the restoration of the glorious Soviet Union or whatever. And don't get me wrong, it's not like Makarov's motivations in the original Modern Warfare 2 and 3 were much better, but at least you understood more or less what he was going for. He basically just wanted to start World War III and watch the West crumble. Sure, it's a pretty crappy motivation, but hey, at least it's understandable. Meanwhile, Makarov in Modern Warfare 23 is always acting like he's playing 4D chess while everybody else is only playing 2D chess, and he's always acting like he's 30, 40, 50 steps ahead of everyone else, and that there's no conceivable way anyone can stop him from doing what he's doing. And yet, what he's doing is trying to frame Urzikstan for attacks against Russians and Russian allies using American-made weapons to somehow persuade people that the US is behind it. Again, I'm not entirely sure what he's going for there. It seems like the end goal is to basically start World War III like it was in Modern Warfare 2 and 3, but with a far more roundabout and convoluted way of getting there that is frankly not going to work. The way this all starts out is that the newly independent nation of Urzikstan is being supplied weapons under the table by Shadow Company, which is still led by Graves, even though he supposedly died at the end of Modern Warfare 22. Spoiler alert for Modern Warfare 22, if you're at all interested. You kind of have to be to even remotely understand what's happening in the storyline of Modern Warfare 23. But anyway, spoiler alert for the end of Modern Warfare 22. You have a boss fight against Graves when he's in a tank, and then you destroy the tank, and he's done. Except they put out an update for Warzone that was expanding the story a bit, and Graves was back, because apparently he was never in the tank, which is an incredibly stupid retcon. Another incredibly stupid retcon is that Alex is back, even though he sacrificed himself in a previous game. He just lost one of his legs below the knee and has to wear a prosthetic now, but otherwise, he's fine. Now, I'm not saying they couldn't pull something like that off, but they just didn't, because the storyline in Modern Warfare 23 either assumes you've played through the entire storyline of Warzone, or just doesn't care, because none of this is explained. If you go straight from the campaign of Modern Warfare 22 into the campaign of Modern Warfare 23, Graves and Alex are just back, and it is never explained to the player. In fact, Graves being back is shown to the player pretty much immediately, but the actual characters in the storyline of Task Force 141 don't know he's back until over an hour into the storyline. They're sitting there in a communications session with General Shepard, who bafflingly is out and about just doing stuff, and then all of a sudden Graves just shows up behind him. It is just downright absurd. But anyway, the point here is that Urzikstan's being supplied these weapons under the table through Shadow Company, and Makarov's mercenary group Koni seizes control of several of these weapons, which are missiles, like in Modern Warfare 22, of course, and Koni is going to use them to set up a false flag attack so that they can frame Urzikstan for it, which is basically a major chunk of the plot of Modern Warfare 22. They recycled the plot of Modern Warfare 22, but did it worse. And it wasn't even good in Modern Warfare 22 to begin with. Anyway, Task Force 141 tries to stop this false flag operation, but is ultimately unable to completely do so. Two of the missiles end up being launched, with their target being a military base in the fictional nation of Kestovia, which is basically a Russian satellite state. And for an added bit of urgency, it turns out that Task Force 141's handler, Laswell, is currently undercover at that base, trying to meet with an informant named Yuri who has information that is important to their mission. And there's a relatively tense moment during this sequence where Price is trying to reach Laswell on comms, but he can't reach her, and in the next mission, which is you playing through the sequence of Laswell infiltrating the base and meeting with Yuri, she actually does receive the message, only for the missiles to strike immediately afterwards, even though they had only just been launched when he sent that message, and it would have taken probably at least a couple of minutes for them to reach the base. You see, this is another serious problem in the storyline of Modern Warfare 23. The pacing is all kinds of off. It's hard to establish a timeline of exactly when events are occurring and how quickly they're occurring, because every single aspect of this campaign is severely rushed. It just occurs rapidly, one after another, in an incredibly abrupt manner with almost no transition whatsoever. To give you a prime example of that, in the lead up to discovering that Makarov's group has the missiles and is targeting that military base, there's a sequence where you're playing as Price, infiltrating a facility that Makarov's goons are extracting chemical weapons from, which he's ultimately going to attach to those missiles, and in one particular instance that gas starts leaking. Price starts to be affected by this, and the mission cuts out with him passing out. Now, the logical thing to do to increase the dramatic tension of this moment would be to drag it out at least just a bit, to give you some kind of downtime in between the pass-out moment and learning what actually happens to Price. But no, immediately after it cuts to black, he just wakes up and he's fine, completely destroying any sense of tension that that moment could have had and leaving the player going, well, why did you even bother doing that? It just gets incredibly frustrating trying to follow the storyline, because in the moment-to-moment gameplay sequences, you can generally understand what's going on, but when you try to put the whole thing together, you just end up with a jumbled mess, something that was clearly just thrown together as quickly as they possibly could just to get a campaign out in general, and the quality of the writing suffers dramatically for it. To suit the needs of the rushed storyline, you end up with characters that just don't behave consistently with how they behaved in the previous games. You have a villain who doesn't even come across as half as threatening as the original Makarov in Modern Warfare 2 and 3, and certainly doesn't have anywhere near the same level of charisma, even though in Modern Warfare 2 and 3 he still didn't have that much charisma. And not only is the pacing of the plot just downright awful, but they've also just done away with all of the character stuff that actually made the writing somewhat tolerable in Modern Warfare 22. They've retconned aspects of the previous two games in an incredibly stupid and cheap manner. They've cut down dramatically on the number of set-piece moments, and not only do they abruptly and unceremoniously kill off one of the main characters, but immediately after that, the game just ends. You don't get any kind of satisfying conclusion, there's no payoff for anything that was set up, you don't get to take down Makarov, none of that. He gets away, one of the main characters is just abruptly killed off in one of the cheapest moments I've really ever seen in a video game, honestly. And after Makarov gets away, the game just ends with a cutscene of the remaining team members scattering the dead one's ashes on this cliffside, and then it just rolls credits. It is an immensely unsatisfying capstone to what is one of the worst written games in the entire series. But as if that weren't enough, the actual gameplay design of the campaign is really rough. You see, there are two types of campaign levels in Modern Warfare 23. The first type is the typical thing you would expect from Call of Duty, a very linear level that follows a storyline and goes from set piece to set piece if it has any set pieces at all. The second type are what are referred to as weapons-free missions, where it drops you into an open area and you are free to complete the objectives in pretty much whatever order you want. You can wander around and find various weapons and equipment and can go about it in either a stealthy manner or go in guns blazing or have a combination of the two. In theory, the latter of these two types of missions is an evolution of the more open level design we saw from Modern Warfare 22. In practice, however, once you start really poking at these weapons-free missions, you realize exactly what they are. They just took sections from Warzone maps and removed the multiplayer aspects of them. You are given a series of extremely generic objectives, which you can complete in whatever order you want, and you can play it stealthy or going guns blazing, but it doesn't really matter which one you choose, because the end result is going to be the same either way. Instead of having the effect that the more open mission designs in Modern Warfare 22 had, where you felt like the game giving you options was saying, hey, look, we're not going to treat you like an idiot. You can go about this the way you want within reasonable limitations and kind of play the game the way you want to play. In Modern Warfare 23, it's really more like the developers were like, oh shit, we really need to fill space. What can we do? I don't know, just take parts of Warzone maps and put them in the single player and call it a day. It is cheap, it is lazy, and above all else, it's really, really boring. And unfortunately, there's more of these weapons-free levels than there are the more curated, proper, linear Call of Duty levels. Which means that the majority of the campaign is not remotely playing to the Call of Duty series' strengths and just ends up being incredibly boring when it isn't being so bad it's actually headache-inducing. And when you bring all of that together, between the awful writing and the, at best, mediocre level design, you end up with one of the worst campaigns in the Call of Duty franchise. Something that was just so haphazardly thrown together just to get something out because their Activision overlords demanded it, that it not only ruins the rather decent streak that they were going on with regards to the Modern Warfare campaigns over the reboot series, but actually so thoroughly ruins them that I don't think they can salvage the storyline going forward. They're going to have such a massive uphill battle with that I don't even think it's necessarily worth it. Who knows, maybe they'll pull a Black Ops 4 and just not even bother putting a campaign in the next Call of Duty. I don't really see that happening, but it's entirely possible given how little they'll be able to salvage from the storyline after this one. And as if all of that weren't bad enough, the campaign's only about 3 or 4 hours long depending on your difficulty setting. On the one hand, the campaign is so bad that it being so short is a bit of a mercy, but on the other hand, the amount of single-player content on offer is just pitiful. And thus, the single-player section anyway is a complete failure all around. But what about the multiplayer? Because that's what people really care about when it comes to Call of Duty these days. Well, honestly, there's actually not that much to talk about here. The general versus multiplayer is your standard suite of modes that are all taking place on maps that are conversions from the original Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3. And some of those maps work far better than others because they weren't designed for things like the TAC sprint or the enhanced mobility that we have with the newer games. So they don't flow as well as they used to with the original mechanics from Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3. Is it a nice bit of nostalgia to play through some of those older maps? Sure, and some of those maps are still quite well designed and actually do still work pretty well even with the new mechanics. But at the same time, there's just nothing new in the map selection. It's all maps from over a decade ago at this point that are just brought forward into the new engine with the new mechanics slapped into them without being redesigned for said new mechanics. In addition, when you look at the rather small selection of new weapons that were brought into Modern Warfare 23, some of them are just returning from previous Call of Duty games, and the ones that are actually new, like the version of the CZ Bren that they've got, are all more or less interchangeable with weapons from previous games, even down to sometimes using the same animations. For example, the equivalent they've got of the CZ Bren rifle series is just a replacement for the Scar series of rifles from Modern Warfare 22, even down to using the same animations. I mean, sure, they are quite similar rifles in terms of how they handle, but at the same time, when you're using the same animations that were designed for something else, and you don't properly adapt them, you end up with stuff like the clipping I mentioned in the presentation section. And it just ends up looking like something they quickly threw together just to fill space effectively. And when you consider the fact that all of the weapons from Modern Warfare 22 carry over into Modern Warfare 23, and thus you have access to all of those as well as the new ones from Modern Warfare 23, it's all the more apparent just how phoned in the new weapons are. There's not really anything new with the kill streaks or score streaks, depending on how you have it set up. You can pick either or, much like with Modern Warfare 22. Or the perks either. They did move a few things around and change a few of the perks, but it's all stuff you've seen before, just with a different skin on it. And while there are new operators, they aren't really any more interesting than the ones in Modern Warfare 22, which weren't really all that interesting to begin with. And there's still the problem of they're trying to be like Fortnite and including all manner of characters that just don't fit in Call of Duty. Like Alucard from Helsing, or Spawn, or Shredder, or Ash from Evil Dead, or Lara Croft. It just goes on and on. I mean, I get it, the multiplayer's not necessarily meant to be taken all that seriously, but it's really hard to suspend your disbelief when you're playing a game that is ostensibly about modern military conflicts, and you've got Shredder and Skeletor and Alucard running around in them. It'd be different if the game had a more cartoony art style and wasn't as grounded as it is, but unfortunately, because they've tried to shoehorn this kind of stuff into Call of Duty, it just doesn't fit, and it looks utterly ridiculous. It's the kind of thing you see crappy MMOs doing, where they just eschew any kind of artistic integrity in favor of making a quick buck. Only the big difference there is most of those MMOs are free to play, so they gotta make their money back somewhere, and Modern Warfare 23 is a $70 US game that also sells a battle pass, and it sells two different types of battle pass. You can either just get the normal battle pass for about $10 US, or you can get the Black Cell battle pass, which has a few extra cosmetics slapped onto it for $30 US. Oh, and by the way, they are pretty confusing about how they do that, too, because you have the Vault edition of Modern Warfare 23 that supposedly includes the Black Cell edition of the Battle Pass, except that it's not the current season that is active right now and that you can earn cosmetics for right now. No, you have to buy that one separately, because that's for Modern Warfare 22, and it just carries over into Modern Warfare 23. No, this is the Black Cell from Modern Warfare 23's first season, which starts in December at some point. So if you were hoping to get the Vault Edition and get into the cosmetics and stuff of the current season, well, too bad. You're going to have to cough up an extra $10 or $30 depending on which Battle Pass version you want for the current season. And once those cosmetics are gone, they're gone for good, because Battle Pass. But once you get past all of that weirdness, I mean, it is still the Modern Warfare 22 multiplayer mode with all those mechanics and a few tweaks here and there, including something actually quite new, which is the tactical stance, where you hold your weapon at a slight angle and you still have a crosshair, but it's a tighter spread than if you were to fire it from the hip. It's kind of a neat idea, and it works better for certain weapons than others, but it's not really a massive change or anything. The movement is slightly better. That's about it, really. It's just Modern Warfare 22's multiplayer, but with some tweaks that make it slightly better mechanically, but at the cost of having not really anything truly new to bring to the table. And that means that the only truly new thing that Modern Warfare 23 brings to the table over Modern Warfare 22 is the Zombies mode, which is just Warzone DMZ, but they replace all of the guys with guns with zombies and hellhounds and such. I'm not even joking or exaggerating there. It's literally just Warzone DMZ from Modern Warfare 22, but there's zombies instead of dudes with guns. It is pathetic. And yet they touted it like it was some massive new feature. The first time we've got open world zombies. But it's just a far crappier version of an existing mode from the previous game. I know people like to complain every single time a new Call of Duty game comes out that it's just the same game all over again, but Modern Warfare 23 is the first time where that is truly the case. The entire mantra with it was reduce, reuse, recycle. And while the end result is certainly not the worst game in the entire Call of Duty franchise like so many people are claiming it is, again, the actual worst game in the series is World at War Final Fronts. If you've played that game, you understand how bad that game is. It is far worse than this could ever hope to be. But at the same time, Modern Warfare 23 is the absolute worst value proposition in the entire franchise. It is not a $70 game. If this were a DLC for Modern Warfare 22, priced at 20 or 30 bucks, nobody would bat an eye. People would be like, yeah, that's fine. I can see that for 20 or 30 bucks. It still wouldn't be great, but at least you would only be paying 20 or 30 bucks on top of what you already paid for Modern Warfare 22, and you would be getting more content for a game you were presumably already enjoying. That would have been fine. But that's not what Activision did. Activision demanded that Sledgehammer make it into a full standalone game, only it's not actually standalone. Again, it installs on top of Modern Warfare 22, and it installs the content from Modern Warfare 22 if you didn't already have it installed, and as long as you don't have a license for Modern Warfare 22, you can't play the content from Modern Warfare 22. But anyway, they wanted it to be a full standalone game for 70 bucks US standard or $100 US for the Vault Edition. And Sledgehammer had a short deadline to do it in, so they did what they could with what they had. They reduced, they reused, recycled, and they threw together what they could to try to make it into a standalone game. And it should come as absolutely no surprise that they failed miserably in doing so. This is not a game worth $70 US for standard or $100 for the Vault Edition. If Activision had gone with the original plan of this being a content pack for Modern Warfare 22, and presumably priced at a lower entry point, something like 20 or 30 bucks, or knowing Activision, it would probably be more like 40 or 50, but anyway, point is, lower price than the main game itself, it wouldn't be so bad. It would still be bad, don't get me wrong. The campaign would still be awful, the zombies mode would still be pathetic, and the amount of content being added would still be fairly small. But we wouldn't have to assess it as a full standalone game being charged full price for. We would be able to say something like, well, yeah, it may not necessarily be the best value, but hey, if you already liked Modern Warfare 22, it's more content for Modern Warfare 22. Instead, we have to assess it as a full standalone game, and as a full package, it may have some fun multiplayer gameplay mechanics, but at the end of the day, it is the absolute worst value proposition in the entire Call of Duty series at this point, and I cannot remotely recommend it to anyone unless you get it at a stupendously deep discount. And I'm not saying, oh, maybe not 20% off. No, I mean, if you get this for anything more than maybe $20 US, you are paying far too much for it. And that is ultimately why I am giving this a 1.5 out of 5. Sure, the multiplayer's still fun. You can still have fun with it. But there is absolutely no way in hell you should be paying full price for this thing. You shouldn't even be paying half price for it. It should be, at absolute most, a $20 DLC for Modern Warfare 22. And even if it were a $20 DLC for Modern Warfare 22, it would still have a terrible campaign and a pathetic zombies mode. Thank you all for watching. If you like my channel, please consider supporting it on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's perfectly fine. I understand. But every bit does help. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in later videos.